crazy entitled driver thinks he can plow his way through a construction zone. I was on a two-way rural road, partially blocked off because construction, with a temporary traffic light. A guy thinks he can ignore the signs indicating that this is a construction zone and needs to wait for the light to turn green before we can go, and instead thinks he can simply pass us by entering the lane in the opposite direction, supposedly because he needs to escape the cartel and get to the doctor. The other day, I was driving down a certain road in the Bay Area where I live. A good portion of it is a windy, two-way rural road, with one lane in one direction and the other lane in the opposite direction. There are double yellow lines down the middle of the road, which they've reinforced with reflective pavement markers and rumble strips, the grooves in the road which make a noise if your tire passes over them, letting you know you're drifting over the yellow lines. The message is clear. Absolutely no passing other vehicles by crossing the lines. The only time you may do so is if you're specifically directed to do so by a police officer, a flagger, or a sign. Important detail for later. Currently, there's a major construction project that will take multiple years to complete. They started about a year ago, and they anticipate it will be finished in 2025. This project has necessitated blocking off one of the lanes with cones, reflective delineators, and signs clearly indicating the lane is closed. There are temporary rumble strips in the lane letting you know that you're entering a construction site, signs with the reduced speed limit of 25 miles per hour. This road is notorious for people wanting to drive fast, and other signs letting you know you're entering/exiting a construction zone. To save the trouble of having to have a flagger on site, they've set up a temporary traffic light, with a sign nearby saying that the wait time before it turns green will be 6 minutes. There's a white line indicating where you're supposed to stop. When I get to the light, I often just shift into park, because I know it will be a while. Because one of the lanes is blocked off, when you're in that lane and reach the part that's blocked, you may cross over, but only when the light turns green. There's a sign directing you to cross over to the other lane, and another sign directing you to go back once you're past the construction zone. I'm sharing all this detail because I don't see how they could make it any more clear that this is a construction zone other than having cops on site in addition to construction workers. Anyways, on to the story. I was in the lane which is blocked off. There was one car ahead of me. We get to the light, stop, and wait for it to turn green. Suddenly, this guy in a Mazda SUV comes driving down the road, sees a bunch of cars stopped, and is like, "No biggie, I'll just cross over the double yellow lines and pass everybody." So he gets into the lane going in the opposite direction, passes all of us. Then, once he sees that we're all stopped and there's a construction zone with a traffic light, he tries to get back into the right lane. Only he can't get in now because the car in front of me is stopped behind the line. There is literally no room for him to squeeze past us and get back into the right lane without driving into the part of the lane that's blocked off. So he wedges his way in as best as he can, but now he's past the white line that you must stop behind as well as the traffic light, so he isn't able to see when it changes. Obviously, we're all honking our horns as a means of asking, "WTF are you doing?" He gets out of his SUV. He's a middle-aged white guy, I'm guessing probably in his late 50s, and he starts spewing all this shit about how he's trying to get away from the cartel, and that he's going to drive like hell in order to do so. He also mentioned some shit about having to get to the doctor. I don't remember exactly what he said, but it was at this point that I went from feeling like the guy was an entitled dumbass to actually being kind of scared. We were all like, "Dude, you're gonna kill someone if you do that." And he responded that he was the one who was going to get killed due to the cartel supposedly being after him. He then asked when he could go, and we told him when the light turns green. Remember, he's not able to see the light because he went past the line where you had to stop. The woman in front of me gets back into her car and moves back a few feet, and I do the same, in order to give the guy enough room so he could back in enough to where he can see what color the light is. I was very afraid that he was going to hurt/kill someone due to him saying he was going to drive like hell in order to escape whoever supposedly was after him and get to the doctor. Eventually, the light turned green, and we carefully made our way into the opposite lane, past all the construction, and then got back into the right lane. I was still really afraid he was going to do what he said he was going to do, as he was going pretty fast. Luckily, he wound up behind another SUV driver who was going at the speed limit. Thankfully, he stayed in the lane and didn't pass him. And now to the next story, story 2. Coworker thinks she can bully and throw a fit because she's twice my age. I, 23F, work night shift as a CNA in a nursing home. Why the other CNA I worked with last night felt the need to target me last night as it was my first time ever working with her. She's been there for only a couple weeks, but she very obviously singled me out looking for a problem. I am a hard worker and have zero interest in any kind of drama. I come to work to take care of my pittance and get paid, then I leave. I may be overly bothered by this because I have anger problems that I work hard on keeping in control due to past trauma, and that I have to keep it together to be successful for my dream career, so I just need to vent. This lady comes in a few minutes after me, and I don't recognize her, so I go out of my way to be helpful and ask her if she's familiar with the pittance she's assigned to, and then give her a rundown of the pittance and their needs, and let her know where I'll be if she needs help. After I finish checking on all my people I'm assigned to take care of for the night, I sit down and start taking notes for a class I'm taking, and she comes up and asks for help repositioning a pittance in bed that can't move on her own, so I drop what I'm doing and go to help her. To reposition a pittance, you first use the bed remote to lift the bed up to above your waist so that you don't hurt your back bending over, and then you get someone on each side of the bed to lift them up and turn them and such. We get to the ladies' room and I grab the bed remote and start lifting it up, but it pauses for a second because of a shortage in the wires. Cheap facility. So it takes me a little more than 2 seconds to reposition it to start lifting the bed some more, and the other CNA raises her voice at me while bobbing her head around with attitude that the bed needs to be way higher than that, and I explained to her that I was trying to lift the bed up, but it paused for a second, and that I know how to do it. She then goes off on me about what I am and am not allowed to say to her, and acting so aggressive over nothing that even the pittance and her roommate are looking at her confused and concerned. I didn't want to feed into her obvious attempts to make a scene, so I shrug it off and finish helping her with repositioning the lady, then turn around and walk out of the room and go back to the nurse's station. Moments later, I get up to answer a call light. Then when I am walking back to the nurse's station, the other CNA is standing there, and before I make it back to my seat, she starts yelling at me about how she is 47 years old and a 20-year-old vet, and that I better watch my mouth, and goes on and brings up my age several times, and how she even has kids older than me, and was saying stuff like, what your problem is, you will respect me. I literally did not disrespect this woman once, and even went out my way to be nice to her, and blah blah blah. The whole time I kept repeating that I'm not gonna argue with her, I'm just here to do my job, and I don't care about her age or her work experience. I told her just stop, I'm not arguing with you multiple times, but eventually just walked away because I felt myself starting to shake and my heart start to race, and I didn't want to go off and regret it later. Like I said, I have anger issues, so I get out of sight and lock myself in a bathroom, shaking, trying to catch my breath while my heart is racing and pounding. I was nearly in tears because this woman was almost in my face about something stupid, and I couldn't blow TF up about it, and I wanted to so bad. I get myself together, and once I stop shaking, I walk out to the nurse's station, up to the nurse who witnessed it all, and told her what happened in the pittance room. Meanwhile, I can hear the other CNA talking loud AF to the other nurse on all the way down the other hall about how I didn't even do anything to that little white girl. All I did was ask for help with Mrs. Pittance's name, and she gave me attitude about how she knows what she's doing, like I haven't been doing this for 20 years, blah blah blah, even though I had actually dropped what I was doing to help her with zero complaints. Then for the rest of the shift, she was starting me down and gossiping with the other nurse, but would get quiet and try to listen to what I would say to my nurse, even though it was all work-related. I'm thinking about asking the Dawn, pretty much like a supervisor to nursing staff, to watch the camera at the nurse's station, so they can see how she jumped down my throat when I was minding my own business, but I don't want to cause more problems. I probably sound ridiculous for getting so worked up over someone acting like a child, but it really had me struggling to hold back. Next story, Story 3. Entitled People in Museums. Hi, I worked at a train museum for 3 summers in a row from aged 15 to 18. So I have plenty of stories and thought I'd share my experiences with the entitled people and crazies. For this to make sense, I need to explain the layout and way our museum works. We have 3 buildings: main station, freight shed, and roundhouse. The first 2 were built in the 1800s, and the second is a perfect recreation of a building built in the 1800s, but was built in the 1900s. Our station closed roughly 1960s, and the rest of the tracks were closed before 1990. Due to the way buildings were built back then, they are not necessarily accessible, and due to age do not have to be. There is no fixing the doors, as many of the doors are actually involved in holding the building up, and any changing of the inside of the building is incredibly dangerous and costs too much. And being historical is actually not allowed without the approval of several different committees. This is important to the story I'm about to tell. We have had only 3 wheelchair users in my time working the station. My job specifically was tour guide. I knew everything and anything there was to know. And for the most part, the wheelchair users can be in the main floor of the station and get into the other 2 buildings. They just can't get into one room of the main station or go upstairs. The first wheelchair user was a child, and due to the small wheelchair, was able to get into the small room. And I brought stuff down from the upper floor to show him, as well as taking pictures using his camera so that he could see the stuff. I did a lot of up and downs, but he enjoyed it. The second wheelchair user sent her husband upstairs, and he took pictures for her, as well as recording my tour so that she could hear about the artifacts, and I spent the time talking to the camera for her. It's the third wheelchair user that was the problem. Our door and deck were not level. The deck was lower due to the fact the deck was slowly sinking into the ground. So we had a ramp that needed to be placed at the doors. Most people understood that we couldn't leave it in place, as the ramp also held the door open. She was here with her husband, and he came in and asked why there was no ramp into the door, and was getting very mad because his wife couldn't get into the building. I did my best to explain that the ramp was for the back door and needed to be placed separately. I explained the deck and building were very old and that they were not made with disabilities in mind, as the time period. Disabled people weren't brought to the main station, but to the freight shed, the only building that had a ramp in the 1800s, due to wheeled carts going in. My coworker was getting the ramp ready as I tried to calm the husband, but he only got more angry and yelled, "That was then, this is now." I was a bit confused and replied, "Yes, sir, I'm aware. That's why our deck has a ramp from the parking lot to the deck, but the deck is still from 1990s and has sunk down. We are replacing it soon and it will fit better, but for now our ramp needs to be put out separately." He huffed and went to get his wife and helped her get inside the building. They went into our display room, which had a big enough door for her chair. Then they wanted to see the next room, but it was quickly discovered her chair would not fit. I apologized and explained the building was built in the 1800s, when wheelchairs weren't commonly in the station and were actually smaller. In fact, we have a wooden wheelchair upstairs that fits through the door fine, but modern metal wheelchairs don't fit through the door. They seemed annoyed, but I showed pictures and explained what was in the room they couldn't get in, alongside the upstairs. The entire time they were both glaring and seemed upset with me. After we finished, I offered to take them to the other buildings. They didn't want me to come with them, but I explained the buildings were locked and you needed a guide to get to them. That's a whole other mess, as they used to be open, but due to eating lead paint attempts and attempted theft of a 1800 bagware, they are locked without a witness. They seemed annoyed and asked why my coworker couldn't guide them instead. I explained that her job was to work the desk and give local information, while mine was to give information about the station. Finally, we made our way to the freight shed, and there was no trouble getting in, as it already had a ramp, and the door is a giant sliding one that has hinges that I hate. But her wheelchair had no problems. In there, she was able to see everything without any problems, and they seemed to be brightening up. I was relieved that everything was going to be okay. I finally took them to the last building. Now, hey, race the big problem. This building houses an old train. There is no ramp. The way disabled people got in these trains was to have the train pull up to the freight shed, and a platform was lowered from the train to the freight shed. over the stairs of the train others would use, and then the wheelchair would cross the gap and be brought in. Due to the fact it's in a building, we can't do this. Would have to pull it next to the freight shed, which just isn't possible, sadly. We got in, and her husband asked if he could go in. I smiled and said yes, of course. He then asked about a ramp, and I kind of paused. These stairs are steep. Think high stepping to get in. A potential ramp to get up would have to be long or it is steep, and the opening isn't wide enough for modern wheelchairs, just old wooden ones. I apologized and explained that she would have to be carried in, but that her chair couldn't go in. I explained the above, but that didn't seem to matter. They ranted and yelled about me ruining their vacation and left saying they were going to report us for ableism. I don't know who they planned to report us to, as everything we did was accommodations to the best of our ability. We are not legally required to make the old building any more accessible than a ramp due to it being completely original, and the train also does not ever have to be accessible because it too is original. We did get checked up by a museum inspector later on, but everything was approved as being safe and educational. Now to the last story, story 4. Customers throw bottle of engine oil at me. I was a cashier ringing customers up on a busy day. I'm usually laid back and very lenient when it comes to returns due to the customer is always right or some shit. A guy walks in with the battery, places a battery on my counter, and selects 1 quart of engine oil. The man comes back to the counter and tells me that he needs to return this battery for warranty due to it not holding a charge. Immediately, I recognize the brand of battery, which is a brand that we do not sell. In fact, our rival company sells it. I had explained this to the customer, but he was not having it. He said he knows he bought it here and was demanding a refund. I tell him again, I'm not going to refund something that wasn't sold at this store. I then call the rival auto parts store, take down the man's information, and see if it was purchased at one of their locations. The store verified that indeed it was purchased at one of their locations and that it was still under warranty. I tell the customer this, and still he is not having it. He tells me I need to do my king job. I reply to him sternly, but still in a professional manner, I am doing my job and I am actually going above and beyond my job. So I could easily say you didn't have a warranty and just sell you another battery. I have no business calling my rival company for something like this, so I went out of my way to tend to your needs, and you're still telling me I need to do my job. If you can tell me how that makes sense, I will give you a battery. The customer had no answer and began to berate me verbally and cussing me out, saying he's going to come back with a gun and handle business. He also commented on my physique and said that steroids are affecting my brain, and that's the reason why I don't know how to do my job. I was in decent shape as a 20-year-old. Due to not having a social life, I would spend 8 hours at work, go home, and study. I also frequented a gym a lot. I would spend 8 hours at a local MMA gym just lifting weights, boxing, jiu-jitsu, and a couple other things. I enjoyed every minute of it, and it kept me out of trouble. Going back to the incident, the man then made a comment as to I need to smile more often when talking to customers. At this point, I was already irritated. I responded with, well, how about I just king tap dance for you, and then started tap dancing in front of him. I was about a foot away from him when this happened. The man proceeded to throw the quart of oil in my face, hitting me in the nose. I immediately reacted with the front kick to his chest. The kick pushed him back a bit, so he began to rush me. I dipped my right shoulder forward and brought my left elbow to his nose. It was like a modified spinning back elbow. I can feel that man's nose crack on my elbow. The customer fell down and began to cry with blood dripping from his nose. When this happened, magically my line of customers got shorter, and I saw a few had switched to another register. Lines. I helped the next customer with no issue. Then I thought to myself I should probably call the cops. I told my store manager about the incident, and he called the cops. My store manager was a friend of mine and trained with me at the gym. He pulled up the video and commented how my foot placement needs work. Police arrived and the man began buying me for assaulting him, but the customers vouched for me and the footage on the camera matched the customer statements, so the guy was arrested for aggravated assault. The police officer that stayed behind to get the video evidence kept rewinding in the video and laughing. As the customer was leaving in handcuffs, he kept repeating that he was gonna come back for me. The police officer asked my store manager If he wanted the guy trespassed, the store manager left it up to me and I said, nah, let him come back. A little bit after I left that job, I joined the military, served for 10 years, and then became a cop in a small town. My soon-to-be wife was also at the store when the whole thing happened. She later revealed to me that that same guy had tried to get her phone number and then called her a wetback for saying no to him, and said if he took her now the cops wouldn't do anything because she was illegal.